recording. Yep.
Okay, we ready to go?
Ready.
All right, we're here today to do an interview with Joseph Bruckner. Joe, you doing all right today?
I'm doing great.
All right, well, since you were the guy that taught me how to do interviews, I'm not going to give you all the background other than to just remind you that what you do today is going to the Library of Congress in Washington as part of the Veterans History Project. And I want to thank you today for being here. Other than that, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your background before you went in the Army, and then just from there pick up and tell us what you did when you were in the Army.
Okay. Well, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia at St. Joseph's Hospital, which was downtown back in 1944 when I was born, March 28th, 1944. Grew up in Atlanta, had, from my standpoint, a great childhood. I can't imagine how it could have been any better. Had two wonderful parents, four wonderful grandparents. Went to Christ the King Elementary School, went to Marist, which is still in existence, but it was an all-boys military school when I went. It was downtown on what was then Ivy Street. My father moved to Charlotte in connection with his job after my sophomore year, so my mother and I went also. So I spent my last 2 years in high school in Charlotte. Then when I graduated from high school, I went to the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, and spent 4 years at the Citadel. Received a commission, an Army commission, and about the only extracurricular activity other than what you were normally doing that I got involved in as a summer camp at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Graduated from the Citadel and then went to the University of Georgia Law School and graduated there after 3 years. And I always knew I was going to go into the military. My father had been in the Army during World War II, and he got called back in during Korea. My grandfathers had been in the military. My uncles had been in the military. Most of them not career, but they were in and stayed in the reserve. So it was just sort of a given that I'd end up going into the military. So after law school, took the bar. For some reason, I had several months between the time I got out of law school and the time I had orders to go on active duty, because I got out in June, took the bar, and then had my orders for February. So I came to Atlanta, worked with Arthur Anderson as a tax attorney for several months, and enjoyed being in Atlanta. I knew I didn't want to be a tax attorney, but it was a pretty good job for several months. While I was at Georgia, I met my future wife, who was also a Georgian. We were married after I went into the military, and we're still married. Been married 41 years. So I went into the military in February of 1970. Went to Fort Knox to armor school. Now my branch was, Army was my branch. My MOS was military intelligence. But all military intelligence officers had to go to a combat branch basic school, and you didn't get a choice. They just picked which one you would go to, and I went to armor school, and I enjoyed armor school. It was in Louisville, good town. It was sort of fun, really. And most of the other members of the class were armor officers. There were a few MI officers, but really a bunch of good guys, and I enjoyed being with them. I learned a lot. I wasn't sure how much I learned that was going to help me when I went to Vietnam, but it turned out I learned quite a bit that helped me. When I left Fort Knox, I went to Fort Hollywood, Maryland. That was, at the time, one of the military intelligence headquarters. The other was out in New Mexico. But if you were just going through the basic MI school, what they call combat intelligence, that's where you went, was Fort Hollywood. So I went through that course, and that was pretty much a basic intelligence course, but it was also some infantry training, that type of thing. And then since I didn't have that much time between finishing the course and subsequently going to Vietnam, they just kept me there, so I was assigned to the domestic intelligence group, which was extremely interesting. Had access to a lot of materials, because that's when a lot of the anti-war demonstrations were going on. A lot of different groups that were being investigated by Army intelligence and the FBI, so that was a pretty good assignment for a few months, a couple of months really. So I left there in November, and my orders were for December 26th. That's when I was leaving to go to Vietnam. So really had a little bit more than a month to travel around and see friends, any relatives that lived outside of Atlanta. Of course, they all fed you like it was your last meal, but it was good to be able to go around and see everybody. So I ended up leaving on December 26th, early in the morning, to head to Vietnam.
That's 1970, right?
That's 1970.
Okay.
Again, had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, they said, you know, having gone to the Citadel, I could end up being on an infantry unit.
Just out of curiosity, before you leave
Sure.
this and get us to Vietnam, was there a reason why you didn't want to go JAG?
I decided that I wanted to start out with a 2-year requirement. And then if I wanted to stay in, I was pretty sure I could extend it. JAG was an extra year, so I just decided I was going to do my 2 years and then make a decision on whether I wanted to extend it. I mean, they said I could probably get into JAG after the 2 years if I wanted to. Of course, there were no guarantees. So that was the reason I didn't go to JAG. Just it was going to be 3. I think it was 3, might have been 4. I think it was 3 years as opposed to 2.
So you were on a 2-year reserve officer duty period,
Yeah.
active duty period.
Active duty period,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Okay.
interrupt you.
And I did. There is a story about JAG once I got to Vietnam, but I'll talk about that later. So I got on the plane, all of course, family, friends, everybody comes out to see you off. And I was excited, I was fired up. I mean, I didn't like leaving my wife or leaving my family and friends, but I figured I'm going, I'm sort of pumped about this. And, well, 3 things I remember. Get out to Oakland, and I had my greens on, had to change into the summer khakis. And I'd eaten so much food, I really couldn't get it buttoned. And I didn't think I'd gained that much weight, but fortunately my belt would be adjusted to fit around me, but I gained a bunch of weight. We stopped in Alaska, and we got off just to go in for a little while I guess they refueled. And it was the first time I'd ever been in below 0 weather, so that was an experience, even though it was only a few minutes. And my first view of Vietnam, of course, was from the air, and I looked out the window, and I was looking at nothing but jungle, and I started seeing these puffs of smoke. And at that point, I thought, you know, there really is something going on down there. And I also all of a sudden started thinking, you know, maybe this isn't going to just be a walk in the park. And I knew it wasn't, but that's when I realized, you know, it's happening down there.
Big difference between intellectually knowing and emotionally knowing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So we land, and I guess my first impression of Vietnam, because people ask you that, to me was just how much was going on. When we got off the plane, I mean, there was just activity everywhere. And it was hot, and I know people felt the heat, but I guess growing up in Georgia, I was used to the heat, but there was so much going on. And so I was there for 2, maybe 3 days. Still had no idea where I was going. And then...
What base camp did you initially go to for reprocessing once you got in country?
Well, I ended up going to the Trang.
Where did you start? Did you start in Da Nang or Cam Ranh or?
Well, really just in Saigon.
In Saigon?
Yeah, yeah. I never moved from Saigon until they flew me up to the Trang.
Okay.
And again, that was just 2 or 3 days. And we were in these like BOQ barracks a couple of days.
Tan Son Nhut Air Base?
Yeah, Tan Son Nhut. And so one morning they said be out here 0600 the next morning, so I was out there with a group, and we flew to the Trang. And I still didn't really know where I was going to be going. And they said within 2 days we'll let you know. And I was there over New Year's because I remember listening to some of a bowl game on Armed Forces Radio. But you know, I just had time to kill while I was there, and I knew that a friend of mine from college was in JAG in the Trang. And so I said, I might just go over and see if they got any JAG slots. I'm here. Are they looking for anybody? Of course, they weren't, because we were downsizing at that point, but, and he was getting ready to go home, and he said, to be honest with you, these jobs are a little bit boring. And he said, Attract's a great place, but the job's not the most exciting thing in the world. So I just went back and waited, and then on either probably January 3rd or so, they told me where I was going, and I was going to DALAT, which is the D-A-L-A-T, which is the southern end of the Central Highlands. And the province was Tuyuen-D-U-C. And they've changed that province name now, and I think they've changed several of them. So I flew into DALAT, and the airport was outside of town, and I got out, and there was somebody there meeting me with a Jeep. And the amazing thing to me, in fact, we got up there, it was late in the afternoon, and we're driving into DALAT, which was a pretty decent drive, it would look a lot like North Georgia. It's hilly, a lot of pine trees, a lot of streams, just a beautiful area, much cooler than Saigon was. And as I got closer to town, I started seeing these really nice old French-style homes. And, you know, some of them were run down and some of them weren't too run down. And I didn't have any idea anything like that existed outside of Saigon. And it turns out, because those were all built by the French, and some of them were still owned by people in Saigon, because they would go up to DALAT as a respite from the heat. So it was sort of a getaway area for them. And so I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to be doing, but I figured going there where there was no American unit, it was going to be a advisory role, because I was assigned to MACV, and that's Military Assistance Command Vietnam. And if you're in MACV, you're typically an advisor to a Vietnamese unit or a Vietnamese individual. You're not with an American unit. And so I was at Advisory Team 26 was the designation. They were all numbered in DALAT. And I was assigned as the assistant S2, and the S1, the S1, S2 is the intelligence officer. And if you're a S2 in an American unit, you're the intelligence officer. In a MACV unit, you're the advisor to the Vietnamese intelligence officer. One of the first things I was told when I got in, I met my boss, who was the S2, and I was the assistant S2, and he made it pretty clear he was ready to get out of there. And he still had a few months left. And a couple of other members of the team said, boy, he's glad to see you here, because he wants to get out of here. And he thought he might get an early out, which he wasn't. And within the first month, in the middle of the night, we hear small arms fire, one shot. And so we all do what we're supposed to do. We scramble, we get our weapons, and his light is on, and he'd shot himself in the hand. He said he was cleaning his .45 and shot himself in the hand. So he's medevaced out, and of course they weren't going to replace him because we're cutting back. So I became the S1, got his Jeep. So all in all, that was a good thing for me. And I had a number of responsibilities as the S2, and one was, the primary one was being the advisor to my counterpart. I've got a picture of Captain Long. He was the counterpart that I dealt with a lot. Wonderful guy. I really don't know what happened to him after the fall of South Vietnam.
What was Captain Long's particular unit? Was he in an ARVN division?
Yeah, he was an ARVN unit, yeah. And he would brief his staff, and I would brief our team on intelligence. And we would gather it primarily from either members of his unit. The Montagnards were very helpful. There was we called the Rough Puff Popular Force, Regional Force. So we had a Popular Force group that was, from what I understood later, one of the more competent ones. They were very good. They brought us a lot of intelligence. We'd get some intelligence from Saigon, and every morning he would make we would talk, and then he would brief his group, and I would brief my group, and my group just consisted of our advisory team and the colonel that was in charge of the advisory team. And we also had a group of 2 individuals who, they never uttered CIA, but I'm sure they were CIA, and I worked with them some. They had a villa, had the only blender in town, so they would occasionally have get-togethers.
At this point, Joe, were you a first lieutenant, second lieutenant, what?
I was a second lieutenant, and shortly after I got in, I was promoted to first lieutenant, because I'd been commissioned out of the Citadel, and I had 3 years at the Georgia Law School. And then by the time I left, I was a captain. But I only served 2 years, but I got those 3 years time and grade.
So the primary source of your intelligence was either the rough puffs, the Montagnards, or stuff you got from Saigon.
Yeah.
The unit you were advising was an infantry unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were providing them intelligence as to where to run patrols and so forth?
Yeah.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
for the record, I wanted
Yes,
to
that's
sort of
exactly
help
what I
clarify.
did.
Okay.
And the 2 individuals who I'm pretty sure were CIA occasionally would provide us with some information. You know, theirs was at a more higher level than what we were getting from the others. But our province was not one of the more dangerous provinces in 2 Corps. There were VC there. We had sightings of NVA, but we never took any NVA prisoners. We did take some VC prisoners and have VC KIA, but we never really had, we had sightings of NVA, but as far as we knew, there were no NVA in that province. One of my responsibilities was to go over documents that we found either on KIA or prisoners. And, you know, my counterpart would look at them, I'd look at them. I had an interpreter, fortunately. And, you know, we would do what you do with these documents. We try to interpret, particularly if we got maps. I guess one of the more interesting items we found, and this was on a POW, was something that I was told would be provided by the political officer of the VC unit. And it was a newspaper article, and I don't remember what newspaper it was from, but it featured Jane Fonda. It had her picture and talked about the anti-war demonstrations, and then the message was in Vietnamese, and what it said to these soldiers was, keep fighting. You know, we've got people in America that are going to keep fighting this war, and we will win because of that. So that was very interesting to me that was taking place.
How did you personally feel about that letter?
It made me mad. I mean, it made me real mad.
How do you feel about Jane Fonda today?
Well, I probably couldn't use the words on tape that I would use, but I think she's, I mean, if it had been up to me, I would have charged her with treason for the things she did. And I know how certain POWs suffered and died because of what she did. So I didn't know any of that at the time, but
So part of what your intel gathering function related to was also prisoner interrogation and document review.
yes. Now, at the time, they had a rule that we were not supposed to be in the interrogation. So I never was involved in an actual interrogation. I wanted to be, but they were pretty strict about that. And I don't know if this was true everywhere, but I know I was told not to participate in the interrogation. I would, my interpreter and I would talk with those who conducted the interrogations and get information, but I was never involved in the interrogation, but I did see the documents that they received.
Can you relate to us, or do you recall anything? I mean, we all know about all the hoopla about Abu Ghraib and
Yeah.
some of the behavior in Iraq, or alleged behavior, I should say, in Iraq. Did you ever have anything like that arise while you were over there?
Never did. Never did. We didn't have a real detention facility. I mean, there was a place where they would put these POWs, but they would be there for a short time, and then they'd take them on somewhere else. Now, I can't guarantee you nothing happened like that when I wasn't there, but I know no Americans were involved. And I'd hear stories, but I had no indication that anything like that was taking place. Now, realistically, in some of the interrogations, I'm sure there were things that went on that technically shouldn't have gone on, and I'm sure that's the reason we were told, don't participate in the interrogation. We were told by our chain of command, not the Vietnamese. They didn't care. But no, I never saw anything like that. And it wasn't because I was trying to turn my head, I just never saw it.
So, okay, continue. So you were sort of telling us about your job function.
Now, two other functions that I had that were very interesting to me and somewhat exciting. One was called Sniffer Missions, and the way those would operate is a Huey would come in, and they were mostly based in Bambi-Tuit, which was north of where I was. And the Huey would be equipped with a piece of equipment, and it would be the pilot, co-pilot, me, somebody running the equipment, and sometimes one other crew member. And we would go up into areas that were supposedly free fire zones. If anybody was there, a human being, they weren't supposed to be there. And this equipment was set up to supposedly detect human beings. And we would fly low, and there'd be a reading. And we would go in and go low, get the reading, and typically we would fire. I'd either have a grenade launcher or just my regular weapon. And we would fire a little bit to see if we would draw fire or if anything happened. And sometimes we'd draw fire before we even did anything. But we had gunships up there. So we wouldn't stay down there long once we took fire or once we got a reading. We would come back up and the gunships would go in. And I know there were a couple of times where there was some intelligence there that there was some type of tunnel complex in an area. And so we got as close as we could to where the intelligence told us it was, and we did draw fire a couple of times there. We were only hit once, but it was always small on fire, and it pinged off, and I don't think they were real great shots. So we never saw any sophisticated equipment down there.
So you would go on these missions?
Yeah, I'd go on those missions. We'd usually do maybe 2 of those a week, and then a lot of times it was in the river valleys too, because they like those areas. But then other times just in the open area, or sometimes in the jungles. And there's no guarantee that what we were picking up were human beings, but sometimes we knew they were because we see activity. But the gunships would then come in and do their thing.
We call those in the 1st Division, we call them Bloodhound Missions.
Bloodhound Missions.
And I think if you remember my interview,
I do.
we talked about that. I
Yes.
talked about that. One of the things I wonder is, what was your area of concentration on your Sniffer missions or Bloodhound missions? Was this based on intel you already had, or was it you were just out flying blind in the free fire zones?
This was typically based on intel we already had, but sometimes they would contact us and say, go out to this area, and I didn't necessarily know what the intel was. They would just say, here's where we're going, and so I would go. So sometimes I knew there was supposedly a tunnel complex there, or VC had been sighted, and word came in from some mountain yards or some villages. But there were times when I went up there that I really didn't have any idea what we were looking for, or at least what the intelligence was.
If I understand the process was the Sniffer, or Bloodhounds as we call them, was to detect carbon dioxide.
Yes, that's
and
right.
that could be from any organic living creature, so it could be a water buffalo. Right.
We joked about that a lot, yeah.
Did you ever have any significant hits where you picked up a big enemy unit or ambush patrol or anything?
Not a big unit, but we did have some hits where we got small units, like a squad out, and we did not go down. They would usually send a Vietnamese unit in to get the dead and the wounded. So
mop up?
We typically would not. There were a couple of times that right around the lot where we would hear there had been an ambush, and we'd go down or we'd go out. But typically going out of the province, we would not go down. The Vietnamese unit would go in. In fact, here's a picture from inside the Huey. I didn't have much time to take pictures, but it shows the equipment and the crew member that was operating it.
And your particular function on these Bloodhound missions or Sniffer missions, what was your particular function on those?
Well, my function was to see what was there and report back to our team. And when it got down to it, I think I probably got more out of just observing what was going on than I got any real intelligence. In fact, one of the members of the team told me about 6 months into my tour, he said, you go on all these, you probably don't have to go on all of them. And I said, well, I know I don't have to, but I feel like I should. And frankly, it was sort of exciting to go out there and,
Gets that adrenaline going.
That's right. And, but
did you have teams, one kept track of where on the map you were and the other one kept track of giving readings off the machine?
Yeah, well, there was one individual that did the readings on the machine, and then really the co-pilot was usually the one that handled the map.
And our system was, we would say hotspot, and it would be, and I don't remember all the details, it's been 40 years ago, but we would say hotspot, and whoever was keeping the map would mark the map at that point, and hotspot had to be a certain reading on the machine. Is that how you did it?
Yeah. I don't remember hotspot being the term. I don't even remember what the term was, but that is how we did it.
Something equivalent
Something like
to
that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, and you were going to tell us about some other intel gathering.
Well, we had a L-19, which we call a Seahorse. I've got a picture of that. That's a fixed wing, two-seater, pilot in the front, me in the back. And we'd go out sometimes once a week, sometimes every other week. And it was not based on any intelligence of what we did there. We just went out to see what we could see. And the order to do that would come from up above. I didn't make those decisions. They would just say, Seahorse is coming in. And I really thought it was based more on availability of the Seahorse more than anything else, the L-19. And we didn't have any gunships or any other aircraft with us then. And we would just go out in certain areas. And there were times there where we did see what we thought were VC. And we both had a map, and we would mark it, the best we could, and you'd see them scrambling across like they were trying to get a better sight. But we didn't really have any weaponry. We had a weapon, but there's a little window like that. You're not going to do a whole lot of shooting out of that. But we'd go back and report what we saw. But I would say 9 times out of 10, we didn't really see anything from there. Because if there was somebody down there, they didn't want us to know we were there, and if they start firing on us, we would know. So.
Well, of course, you and I probably, and Phil probably understand this, but just for those that might be watching this video, how would you identify what you felt might be a potential VC versus a farmer?
Well, a lot of it was guesswork, but typically if you saw, particularly a group like 3 or 4 people, and they're running from one place to another, or you see them run and then they disappear, you got a pretty good idea that they're probably VC. If they had black pajamas on, that might be a sign, but a lot of people wore black pajamas, and sometimes they wore other things, so that didn't really mean too much to us. It was usually, if you'd seen some attempt to evade us. Mm-hmm. You probably could have had 3 VC around a campfire, and if you don't see any weapons, we wouldn't even know they were VC. We were low enough where you could see weapons, so if you saw people carrying AK-47s.
How low were you in the we used to call it we called it a bird dog. You called it a something, but we called it bird dog. But go ahead.
It's hard for me to, I guess I don't really remember exactly how high we were, but we were low enough where you could see if somebody had an AK-47. We flew pretty low. It wasn't treetop low, but we'd be
under 100 feet.
I would say 100 to 150 feet sometimes.
Okay. And if I understood you, you didn't have any gunship escort or?
No, not on those.
Did you have access to call in an artillery fire mission if you needed to?
We did, but we never did do it. We never really saw anything big enough to justify that. And so many of the times when we thought we saw something, we weren't really sure if they were just locals or DC. And they told us before you do something like that, you better be darn sure We never did call in, because we never saw anything big enough, and we never, you never got any rocket fire or anything like that. In fact, we never even got small arms fire in the L-19 like we did at the Sniffers. But I think Sniffer Missions, they were pretty sure they probably knew enough to know that we knew something was there. Where I think they probably knew these L-19 missions, we were just out groping. Just
Fishing.
Fishing, yeah.
Aerial reconnaissance,
Yes,
I think they
aerial
call it.
reconnaissance.
Right.
In fact, one story that was sort of funny, the first one I went on, and I don't remember how long I'd been there, but it was after the S2 had left. And I was briefed on what I was supposed to do. And I ate breakfast that morning. And we had Vietnamese cook who cooks pretty good breakfast. And I had a regular breakfast. And I got up in that L-19. And after a while, he went down real low. I mean, he might have been under 100 feet, lower than I think he ever went any other times. And he started, twisting his wings and going up and down, and I could feel that breakfast coming up. And I lost it out the window. And I'm thinking, boy, I hope he didn't see that. First thing he said after we landed, he said, well, Lieutenant, how was your breakfast? Well, I found out that was sort of a rite of passage. When they get some young lieutenant, they're going to make sure he knows not to eat breakfast before going on these. But I really had a lot of respect for these chopper pilots and the fixed wing pilots. Some of the missions, particularly the Sniffer missions, where they probably felt it was no big deal, but I was thinking it was a big deal if you're getting fire. A couple of times we got caught in a surprise storm up there in the mountains. And they were just so cool and so competent. I mean, I've bragged about those guys. I didn't know any of them personally other than just hanging around with them after we get back. But they were just...
Who
they were
provided
courageous,
your
but
air
they-
support? Was it an American unit or a
Yeah,
Vietnamese unit?
American.
American
It was
unit.
all American, yeah.
And they were out of Delat,
No, they were out of Bambi-Tuit.
Bambi-Tuit?
Yeah.
I see.
It's possible some came from other places, but they were out of Bambi-Tuit.
What was the American unit that operated out of Bambi-Tuit primarily?
I don't even remember. I don't know. But I know they've been up there a long time. I read a book about a group, in fact, I'll mention these people too, the Christian and Missionary Alliance, which is a missionary group that missioned to the Montagnards. And in the book, they were talking about even the 60s, I guess mid-60s or so, about a unit of helicopters, a wing of helicopters under Bambi-Tuit. And I'm sure I could look through some of the old material and see what unit it was, but I really don't know.
Okay, you were continuing to tell us about your tour, and I think we're up to somewhere about midway through your tour.
Yeah, and I mentioned this, that jogged my memory when we talked about Bambi-Tuit in this book. There were a group of missionaries in Delat, the Christian and Missionary Alliance, and that group had been in Vietnam for years and years. And they primarily served the Montagnards. And they had a compound, and they were just really good to us, to our advisory team. They would have us over sometimes to eat. They even had a small basketball court, and if we had free time, we could go over there. And really good people, and they got us information because the VC didn't like the Montagnards at all. The Montagnards by that time had been, a lot of them had converted to Christianity. I don't know what percentage, but and they liked the Americans. The Americans had been good to them. So they would bring information about what they saw. It wasn't sophisticated information, but that's how we got a lot of information to know where to run these missions, is from what these Montagnards would tell us. But these people did a real good job. And one of the benefits to my assignment, since there were so few Americans, is I got to deal with the civilians a lot. And Delat had the Vietnamese Military Academy, which was the West Point of Vietnam. And they also had a big seminary up there. There was a university, pretty high-end town. It used to be wonderful hunting, a lot of tigers, elephants. Of course, that changed a lot with the war. But I was in one Vietnamese individual's house, and they had a picture of Teddy Roosevelt with a tiger that he had killed, and he had hunted up there. the local school, grammar school, contacted our province advisor and wanted to know if we had anybody that wanted to teach English after school. So I did that for a few months, and that was a good experience for me, at least. I don't know how much English I was able to teach them, but they were probably more like 10 years old. And I would go there, I think, 2 days a week if I wasn't out, and teach English. And I think that helped probably with the attitude towards the Americans, as we were trying to do something to help them out.
Were you able to travel the roads with pretty good security?
Around the Delot area, yes. Yes, in fact, I had that Jeep, and I felt pretty secure. Now, if you got too far out, you wouldn't want to do it, but around the fringes of Delot, yeah, I could. And there were beautiful areas. There's a waterfall outside of town. I wouldn't typically do it by myself, but yeah, there were still remnants of 1068. That was about the only time that Delot had really been attacked. And I think I mentioned the golf course.
No, you
I
didn't.
hadn't mentioned the golf
Tell
course.
us about the golf
There's a golf course at Delot. One of the few golf courses in Vietnam at the time. And it was a golf club. And during Tet, that's where the VC came and dug in. And when I got there, there were still signs of where they had dug in. And they were there for a couple of days, and then they got driven off. I've got a picture of a little pro shop that has golf club. And there was a beautiful hotel called the Palace Hotel that was built by the French. And when I was there, they said about the only people that could afford to stay there were the Japanese and the Russians, because you'd have a lot of Americans traveling over there to a beautiful old hotel.
Not in those days, I wouldn't think.
No, not in those days. But I did get access to some of the civilians in different positions just because we had the freedom to roam around. Our province advisor was a civilian. Vietnam was divided into provinces like we have states. And there was either an American military person or a civilian that was the chief, the head American in each province. And mine was a civilian. He was a wonderful man. And he would have get-togethers of, made you feel like you weren't even in a war, because he had a nice villa that he lived in, and he would invite us, like the officers over there, and he'd invite Vietnamese to come. So you got a feel of what the people were like. And I know there were a lot of our soldiers who complained about the Vietnamese being lazy, but after talking to some of them, they've been fighting wars for years and years and years and years. And if you wanted to do something today and they said let's wait till tomorrow, it'd be frustrating to us as Americans. But I eventually realized they know they're going to be fighting wars a long time after we're gone. So
fighting before we got there and
exactly,
after we left.
Exactly.
So did you stay in this position for the entire
Yes.
tour you were over there?
I did.
Okay. Did you ever participate in any ground troop operations,
No, I
search
didn't.
and seals, or
No. In fact, my counterpart rarely went out in the field. I mean, my only activity like that was just the Sniffer Missions, the L-19s flying. I never went out. In fact, what's funny, I think it was 2 days before I was leaving. And he said, "You want to go out on a patrol with me tonight?"
your counterpart?
My counterpart. And I said, "Yeah." And so, of course, I had to tell the colonel, and he said, "Don't do it." He said, "Don't do it. You got 2 days left." And he ordered me not to do it, which was probably good advice.
Probably good advice and a good order.
And I think my counterpart probably wanted to do it. I'm assuming he was going into an area which was pretty safe and just wanted to do it. But I just was honest with him. I told him.
Were there any major offensives in your area of operations while you were there?
No, everything, and my area of operation was purely that province. We did find out, in fact, some of the areas we went in and the gunships came in, I think were some of these areas that there were actually some Vietnamese units who would go into the outer edges of the province for R&R. And they would just, they'd send them there and they'd give them X amount of time to have an R&R. And from what I understand, some of those missions we ran were in those areas. And we never saw masses of groups, but there was never any, there would be occasionally you get some mortar fire, but I don't think they really wanted to destroy the lot. I think their idea was, we're gonna win this war and we want the lot there. You know, out in the hinterlands, it's different. And they go into these villages and they give the villagers a hard time, and that's, that,
Yeah.
you know, that again, that's where we would get some of the intelligence. But as far as a full-scale, big-time operation, we really didn't have that.
So in your province, it was pretty much policed, for want of a better terminology, by the ARVNs of the Republic of Vietnam soldiers as
Yeah.
opposed to American
Yes,
infantry.
yes, we had an engineering group, engineering unit that was on a hill outside of town, but no, we didn't have much activity with American units.
So you remained pretty much, and you were there 1 year
Yeah,
total?
a little bit less than a year. They gave me orders in October, so I was there about 11 months.
Okay, what was the closest call you ever had as far as getting shot or wounded or?
I guess the closest call was probably when we got hit by small arms fire at the Sniffer Mission. You know, there could have been other close calls when I was in the air that I didn't know about, but I think that's probably, you know, we got shot at, but I guess maybe it's that feeling of invincibility. They would miss us most of the time. And I think, but the time we got hit, that was probably the closest call because they were getting closer. And I guess the other one didn't have anything to do with the enemy, but the other one, they were taking the payroll up to the engineers. And they were flying and wanted me to go as the payroll officer. I wasn't technically the payroll officer, so I went up. And we stayed up there a while, just for some reason we hung around with them. And the weather turned bad, and boy, on the way back, it was real bad. In fact, I was questioning to myself why they didn't just stay there. We just stay there for the night. But I wasn't going to second guess the pilots. And we made it back. But boy,
That's some rocky weather.
oh, yeah. But I never had the experience that you and a lot of our troops had where I was out in the jungle and, you know, almost hand-to-hand combat. I
It
mean,
didn't quite get that bad, but with me anyway.
Yeah.
I know it did with a lot of people.
Yeah.
What about mortar attacks, rocket attacks?
We had some mortar fire come into town occasionally, but it was rare. I mean, I only remember specifically 2 times where you heard mortar fire come in and it didn't do any damage. And like I said, I don't think they really wanted to do anything to the lot. You know, they wanted to control that outer area. To various degrees, they probably did control much of it, but it was more like the one thing we wanted to do is try to protect those villages. And we did move some mott yards out of their villages to move them closer in, which is sort of a sad thing to have to do. I mean, I was there for a couple of them, and you had these people that were probably 80 years old that lived there their whole lives, but it was just, there weren't the resources to protect them 24 hours a day.
In regard to just the geography of Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, where was Dalat located in relation to, let's say, the Laotian border or the Cambodian?
It was about 140 miles north of Saigon, and I want to say 50 to 60 miles east of the border.
The Cambodian border?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any incursions either by aerial observation or otherwise into or near the border?
No, we never went outside our province. Now, you know, we get closer to the, you mean us?
Yes.
No, we pretty much were confined, both our group and this Army unit, to the province. And the most enemy contact was this PF unit, and they had a leader who was just amazing. And I will probably never know everything they did, but they'd go out for a week or so at a time, and they'd come back, and they had more information that could be verified. They weren't just making up stuff. And they would have had, I mean, they would give us numbers of kills. We had absolutely no way of verifying it, but they would come back with information. They'd come back, I mean, I've got some pictures that I didn't bring to show here, but of you know, dead VC and them around the VC. And we had a deal with our 2 civilian intelligence guys where if they brought us something really good, we could get weapons for them. And they like to get these fancy weapons. Swedish Ks, well, if you get them a Swedish K, that was big time.
These are captured weapons or?
Well, I don't know how our guys got them. All I know is I would talk to them and say, boy, these guys came back with X, Y, Z, and if it helped them, help our civilian intelligence guys, they were very willing to somehow get a hold of some of these weapons. And they got cash too. I mean, they were soldiers, but they were sort of mercenaries too. But they were brave guys. And you know, sometimes, from what I could see, there was a little bit of jealousy between the ARVN and the RFPF. But boy, my counterpart loved those guys. He loved that group because they would, I think they probably saved his unit a lot of agony.
The RFPFs that are always, I believe, we used to refer to them as rough puffs.
Rough puffs, yeah.
The rough puffs were kind of, just so people watching this may remember, kind of a National Guard
so like
unit
civil
or
guard,
militia,
National Guard,
civil guard
that's
kind of
right.
unit.
That's right.
Of course, National Guard down in this country is taking on a whole new
Well, that's
meaning.
right.
They are carrying the bundle.
Oh, yeah, no, they
bundle
weren't as
plate.
sophisticated as our National Guard,
Right.
but to them, that, relatively speaking, that's what they
Yeah.
were. And they didn't wear uniforms, they just, whatever they had, they'd wear.
So it sounds like you came home with a real positive impression about the Montagnards and the Vietnamese people.
I did, and I think part of it was just being able to be exposed to them. And it was, you know, generally a pretty high-class Vietnamese person, but heck, I'd go down into the lot and get my hair cut. And, you know, the barber, usually I'd go with my interpreter, he'd get his hair cut, so we'd have those conversations. And so when I came back, I mean, I was almost like a missionary to these people, because I just thought they were mostly, you can't generalize,
Yeah.
but generally honorable people. They just, I mean, these Montagnards and the Vietnamese villagers themselves, they just wanted to raise their family.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were.
I share your belief there, I really do.
Yeah.
What about Mayo tribesmen? Did you have any contact
No.
with Mayo tribesmen
I
at
never
all?
did.
Yeah. The Montagnards, that's what we used to call the mountain people. I
Yes.
think Montagnard actually means mountain people, I
Yes.
believe. Were they people that were, as far as their level of Western civilization, were they, for want of a better term, how would you put them?
Well, we probably as Americans would have called them somewhat uncivilized the way they lived, because they were in the mountains, they didn't have a lot of resources. To the Vietnamese, they were the lower class people. And there was one time, I was told this, I've never read any history, that the Vietnamese and the French wouldn't even let the Montagnards into the lot, city, unless they were working. I mean, they mistreated them. Now, when we were there, I didn't see the mistreatment because I think they were such a valuable asset. And I think the Vietnamese had bigger fish to fry. The French, I'm told, weren't good to them at all. And there were some Vietnamese French, you know, descendants of the Vietnamese French, but that's why these missionaries were so important, is they really treated them, that was their main goal, was to treat them well. But in answer to your question, they were probably the lower rung, but there were different levels of Montagnards, and there were different tribes. Each, you know, different tribes had names, and a lot of them would be encompassed into the term Montagnard.
So there was somewhat of a caste or
Yes.
racial discrimination going
Oh,
on
yes.
between the Vietnamese and the Montagnards.
Yes, definitely.
I sort of detected some of that myself while I was there, although, as you said, they were a great source of intel.
They were very good source of intel. And after the war, we ended up being in touch with this couple that ran the mission after they got back, because there's one of those churches near our house. And they told the story of there were two young boys who were just wonderful kids when they were teenagers, well, probably 17, 18. And they were very helpful. And I don't know if it was VC or NVA, but I think it might have been even NVA, but when they took over, they looked for those two kids. I mean, they were going to either kill them or do whatever they were going to do to them. And they, Ross and Ellen, the two missionaries, said that these kids actually would be in a ravine, a very shallow ravine, where these soldiers were just within 20 feet of them looking for them. But the kids got out, and I don't know where they are now, but they somehow got out.
Glad to hear that. So when you got home, how were you treated when you got home?
Well, I was treated great. And I don't know if this is because, I know in the South, I know Georgia, South Carolina, those states are pretty pro-military. We got a lot of military bases here. But of course, my family thought I was a hero, and I wasn't even close to a hero. But, they treated you like you've gone to war. My friends, every one of them, everybody I ran into, I just never had that problem. In fact, when I first got back, I went to work with the prosecutor's office, Fort County Solicitor's
So
office.
did you get out of the Army when you came home?
Yeah.
How long after you came home? You came home, if I've got this right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, somewhere around December of 71?
Well, actually, it was late October of 71.
Late October 71?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I decided not to go with a law firm because I'd been gone. I'd never practiced law, really. So I went with the prosecutor's office, and I think one of the reasons he hired me is because I'd been in Vietnam. He was very pro-military.
In Fulton County?
In Fulton County.
So at that time, it was Lewis Slayton, wasn't it?
Well, Henson McCoff.
Henson McCoff,
And we
that's
worked
right.
with Lewis Slayton. But-
Right.
Now, I will mention something before we get to the post-Vietnam thing that's a little bit unique. My wife and I, as I said, were married while I was at Fort Hollywood. We came back to Atlanta for the wedding. And, of course, we didn't have any children. And a friend of mine who had gone to the Citadel with me and Georgia Law School was married. And he deployed much faster than I did, much quicker. He was over there before I was. His wife went to Bangkok to teach at the American school in Bangkok. And there were a lot of servicemen's spouses who were doing that. And she was living with another girl. And she contacted Lucy even before I went to Vietnam and said, you ought to do this. You ought to come over here. You don't have any reason to stay in the States. And I'll make a real long story short. So my
No,
wife
don't
said-
do that. We want to hear the whole
Okay.
thing, so go ahead, tell
She
us.
decided she wanted to do that. And I was a little bit reluctant because, in a different world, but she'd take care of herself. So I said, that'd be great. Well, these girls said, we go over to Saigon and see our husbands sometime. Now, they were stationed in Saigon, but, and she said, maybe we could see each other. And I said, well, I don't know where I'm going to be, but I said, yeah, go for it. Might as well. So I headed out in December, and she immediately started making plans to get over there. And soldiers were not supposed to have dependents in Vietnam. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But so she made arrangements to get the job, and they hired her to teach. And she dealt with these two girls who pretty much walked her through what she was supposed to do. She sold our car and got some money and did everything she needed to do. And I think it was like March, I don't remember exactly, but it was 2-3 months after I was over there. She headed to Bangkok. And we would talk to each other every now and then. I'm sure you remember how that would work. I mean,
The
you had
Mars
a certain
system.
time over, and, but we would get to talk to each other occasionally. Well, my province advisor found out that she was over there. Not found out, I guess I told her. And I said, if she gets to Saigon, I may try to get on one of these Air America flights and get down there if there's not something going on here I need to be here. He said, go for it. And he was very, very adamant about trying to show that we were in a secure province and that we were doing our job. So he said, go for it. So she went through all sorts of hoops to get paperwork to get into Vietnam. And we coordinated it, and I got on one of these Air America flights and flew down to Saigon, and we spent the weekend together in Saigon. And she came with the 2 other wives, and so these 3 couples, we went to the zoo, and just almost like a normal life, except I was in uniform. So I got back, and these guys I served with, they couldn't believe this was going on, but they thought it was pretty cool. Well, not long after that, the spouses of her 2 roommates got early outs. They didn't realize they were going to get early outs, but they did. So she was going to be there by herself, and she didn't want to be there by herself. And she had, right before that, was planning a trip to Saigon. And the province advisor said, why don't you have her come up here and visit? And I said, golly, I know that she's not supposed to do that. And he said, well, I'm the province advisor, if you want to do it. And I said, well, sure. So she got a flight to Saigon, got a flight, an Air Vietnam flight from Saigon to Deloitte. Had to go through all sorts of bureaucracy, as you can imagine, with the Vietnamese government and all to do this. And she flies up to the Air Vietnam flight to Deloitte. And another one of our team and I, we take my Jeep out there. In fact, I've got pictures of her greeting me.
Did you bring us any of those pictures?
You know, I didn't bring those pictures.
Yeah.
I did bring a picture of her, but
Yeah.
but I do have those pictures. But in fact, you can't really see her. You can see the back of me and then her arms around my neck, but you can't really see the two of us. And so I had reserved a room at the Palace Hotel, probably the first American to stay there in years. And so she stayed there for a while, and the province advisor had a party for her. I mean, it was just pretty good. So, but then she went back, and and while she was there, she met the missionaries. And she's a veterinarian. She was in vet school when I was in Georgia, and they had some equipment that they had that really didn't know what to do with. And they said, you know, if you want to come up here and live, we could at least provide some sort of cover for you that you're up here helping us. So that got her excited. She goes back to Bangkok, because her roommates are leaving, and she ends up immediately starting to plan to come to Deloitte. And the province advisor was all for it. He said, that'd be great to have an American civilian here. And, it'll show that, you know, we're at peace here in Deloitte. It'd be good for the Vietnamese women to see an American woman up here.
Mm-hmm.
So she went through all the hoops she had to go through, and ended up in Deloitte and stayed there. We had, of course, I had to stay in our place where our team stayed at first, but we had two State Department guys who were, well, they were really police advisors, wonderful, wonderful men. And they said, look, she can stay here. We got all these different rooms. What we ended up doing, and I'm still amazed to me that we got away with it, she and I rented a little place from this old Vietnamese whose son he had sent to France to study, because he wanted to be prepared if the worst happened. And he had this big villa, and he rented us his basement apartment. So whenever we could, we lived there. We stayed there, and I would spend the night there a lot of nights. And when I couldn't spend the night there, she'd stay at the State Department place, the police advisor's place.
So how many months was she able to
Well,
stay there?
I would say, I think it might have been like 4 months, 4 or 5 months. And I don't remember the exact times, but I do remember that probably about that 4th month, there was some indication that maybe people had found out this was going on, and probably not very
Weren't
good
you
idea.
thrilled about it?
Yeah, I mean, nobody in our group cared. But then I got orders for an early out leaving in October. So what we did is I was able to get an R&R in Hong Kong. And we went to Hong Kong, and then she headed on home, and I came back for my last month or so. So she was there for a decent amount of time.
Well, that is a great story. That is a great story. I've heard it. I thought I had heard it all, but that is a fantastic story.
And she, with these missionaries, they said, you know, we're going out to such and such Montagnard village. Joe really can't come because the VC, we know we're watching this, and they're sort of letting us do what we want to do. But if we start bringing soldiers out there, that might be a different story. So she went out to this Vietnamese village where they were going out there. They had somebody that was providing medical care with them, and so she went out to not Vietnamese
Kind
village.
of S5.
Montagnard village is what
Kind of an S5 thing,
Yeah.
a civil action
Yeah.
visit.
Yeah, but there was no military involved. It was just the missionaries and Lucy, and there was somebody, I guess maybe one of the missionaries that had some medical training, just to go out and visit.
So we should have had her here, Joe. She could have probably
Yeah, I
told us.
thought about that. I should have done that.
Yeah.
If I was
I would love to
100% sure I
have
was going to do this
heard her
interview, I would have brought her.
Yeah, really.
In fact, I do have a picture here. I debated whether to put this on here, but it's in my briefcase. We sort of posed a picture of my Jeep with her in it. I'll get it before.
Well, it's too late for you to get court-martialed. I think the statute of limitations has
That's
probably
right.
run.
Here's Here is where our team lived, and I always felt bad about this because these were much better quarters than any.
I can
most
assure you they were
military
better than
groups.
anything I ever lived
Yeah,
in.
we had you can probably see a bunker. Well, you can't see the bunker, but there was a bunker. But it really was an old house, and the team.
Nice facility. It looked
Yeah,
like.
it was. I mean, you didn't get wet at night. This is not a great picture of DeLotte, but it's a little picture of DeLotte, just some of the stores. But
Yeah, it looks like that's an interesting looking car there too.
Yes,
I don't
it is.
think I ever saw a car in any of the villages we were in.
Yeah, it's an old French car.
The only time I ever saw a car was on the rare occasion during the Tet Offensive. We went to Saigon. I think I saw some cars there.
If you'll hand me that, I'll show you the picture. I'll go ahead and get the picture.
Sure,
of Lucy
absolutely.
on there. She might kill me. But
There you go.
Okay. That's good. Well, I do have a picture of the golf club. I'll show you that since.
Yeah, we want to see
This is
that.
the old French golf club. It wasn't a golf club at the time, but it's got the sign
Interesting.
there.
Very nice looking
And,
club too. So did you get to play any golf while you were over
No,
there, Joe?
there are a lot of big holes from the VC. I probably could have scored better than usual. But normally she would wear slacks or something like that around town, but she dressed up for this picture. So I figured that was sort of a unique.
I
Picture
would say it
with,
probably was, yeah.
But it was a great experience for her. I guess I think we're supposed to show a picture of us, so there's a picture of me.
All right, that's you in 1971, in country?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And she taught English too. And I think that was probably even better than me doing it, for them to see an American female coming in there and dealing with the children.
So
But,
you were very fortunate then, both coming back with all your
Yeah.
limbs and arms and legs and sanity, and also having the ability to be able to see your wife during that time was nice.
And we went back on our 25th anniversary, we went back in 1995 to visit, and we went to Saigon, and then we had at the time, I don't know what it's like now, but you had to have a driver and a guide. Driver was obviously a government employee, he never spoke at all, but the guide was wonderful. And we had a couple of them depending on where we were, but we drove up to DeLotte and went down some of the rubber plantations. And, then we went to Way. I'd never been to Way, and I wanted to see it. We went up there, and that was a good experience to go see what was there then. And,
How did it make you feel? Did you have any?
well, it made me. Well, one thing that made me proud is that anytime a Vietnamese would find out we were an American, they just were all over us. Not for money, but just say, "Oh, my father worked for the Americans," or now this would be in Saigon and DeLotte. They just seemed to like Americans. Now, you hate to generalize. I'm sure there were a lot of them that didn't, but if they did, most of them would think we were Russian because there were very few Americans over there then that traveled.
Mhm.
Russians came, and our guide said they didn't like the Russians at all. The Russians were sort of treated them like, all of them like second-class citizens. But we had some good experiences of people just seeing us and hearing us talk and coming up to us. When we got up to Way, it was not quite.
All right, it's recording.
Okay. Joe, before we went off the record, you were sort of helping us tell us what you did after you came back. If you just kind of finish that up, and then anything else you might want to say just in concluding here.
Okay. Well, I was with the solicitor's office for a year and a half, and then spent 30 years with the Bell South Legal Department, and a career that I loved, and I retired from Bell South and I'm retired now. Lucy and I have been married 41 years, had 2 daughters. I've had a good life, and I'm very proud of my military service. I didn't do anything special, but I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to serve and the opportunity to go to Vietnam. And I appreciate you giving me the chance to tell my story.
We appreciate you giving us your story. Did you ever have any political position about the war then or later?
Well, I was in favor of us staying until we got the job done, and hoping that maybe some of the restrictions that our government was putting on us would be eased, because everybody I've talked to that have been out in the field and up in the air feel that they're they had a lot of opportunities to do what was necessary to just put an end to that war, but we're not allowed to do it. So I guess that's a political statement, but so I guess the answer is yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here today. Now,
No,
okay.
go ahead now with
All
us.
right, Joe, would you identify yourself for the record? Just give us your name and your date of birth and your place of birth and your rank and branch of service.
My name is William Joseph Bruckner, B-R-U-C-K-N-E-R. I was born on March 28, 1944 in Atlanta, Georgia. I served in the U.S. Army in military intelligence, went in as a second lieutenant, came out as a captain.
And what years were you in Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam from December of 1970 through October of 1971.
Good.